Hello, I'm Connie Falk, president here at Elon, and we are speaking with Alumni in Action today as part of a series featuring Elon graduates and our faculty. And so I'm eager to have this conversation today about education and have three passionate educators with me today. First is Tracy Helton Lewis, Elon class of 1993 and parent of 2010 graduate Brandon, who Tracy is the Director of Communications, Teacher Recruitment, and Retention for Surrey County Schools here in North Carolina. Welcome, Tracy. And then we also have Drew Houlihan, a North Carolina Teaching Fellow from the class of 2001, who is in his fourth year of service as the superintendent for the Union County Public Schools in North Carolina, and has recently been appointed to the reopening of schools here in North Carolina. So we'll be interested in hearing about that from him. We also have Scott Morrison, Associate Professor of Education, who has been a member of Elon's faculty since 2013. His research focuses on ecologically minded teaching, everyday environmental education, and the uses of Twitter and Instagram, social media, and teacher education. So welcome to everyone. To get us started, I thought it would be best just to kind of get a status update of where you are and in the coronavirus impact and understand what's happening in the work that you do. So Drew, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Tracy and Scott.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to be part of this. It's good to connect with you all, and I hope everyone is safe and healthy at this time. Schools across the state of North Carolina in the public K-12 sector, per the North Carolina governor, as you all are aware, are closed for the remainder of the school year. In Union County and specifically, we have taken the past 8 weeks to really try to figure this thing out. We have the mantra of going slow now to go fast later, because we understand that given the dynamics, the many dynamics of this challenge and the pandemic, many of our families, many of our employees, many of our faculty, it's a game changer for them. And so we are trying to do our best to meet our families where they are. In Union County in specific, one interesting tidbit, we actually were closed 2 days prior to the governor making his announcement because we had an E. coli issue in our water system. So we've got about 2 more days on top of the rest of the state, unfortunately, where we were out. But really, our current status is we're currently offering new content and new learning to students K-12. We are trying to determine access issues, internet issues, device issues, and a number of different things that all school systems are really challenged with right now. I think the biggest thing that I would say is we have put the health of our families, of our students, and of our employees at the first. Not just physical health, but also their social, emotional, and mental health. That has been a big, big factor in what we're doing. Very proud of our team and very proud of our school system, and looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Great. Tracy?
So Drew has given a great summation, and I too want to thank Dr. Book for this opportunity to speak about education currently in the face of COVID-19, because truly we're all grappling with this issue that we've never seen before. But I'm very grateful for the leadership that we've seen and from our educational leaders at every level. And even in the face of the challenges, of course, early on, our primary focus was caring for and feeding our students. And I'm really proud of the efforts that we have been able to accomplish. To date, we have provided over 325,000 meals. And in a district our size with just a little over 7,700 students, that's phenomenal in 8 weeks. The week that the governor made the decision to close schools, we were on spring break because we actually were on an innovative year-round calendar. So we actually had a little more instruction than most folks in the state, and we were on spring break that week. So our board had made a decision that we were going to extend spring break, and then the governor decided to close schools. So our issues are the same as Drew mentioned, equity and access for all, supporting our parents as they are trying to educate children at home, making sure that our students are well mentally, socially, and emotionally. And we are now trying to shift our focus from being reactive to being proactive and looking to a reopening of school and what that's going to look like down the road.
Very good. Scott, what about you? How are things with you and your curriculum, as well as with the teachers, student teachers that you work with?
Thank you for having me. Happy to talk about education. In my world in higher education, I'm working with a lot of future teachers who are learning about navigating it themselves, but also what it means to be a teacher of young people during this time. I'm married to a first grade teacher who is navigating what it means to communicate with her own students and their families and to support them. And then I'm teaching my own courses and trying to figure out what it means to be an online instructor and how to facilitate learning in meaningful ways. And I think there's a lot of issues that are in the forefront of my mind right now. Definitely, as has been mentioned, the social emotional well-being of children. I was actually talking to an alum this morning who is in graduate school in the UK, and some of her PhD research is around how parents are handling the situations with young children at home. And some of their preliminary data is suggesting that kids have some new fears, which is probably not surprising, but parents have reported that their kids are afraid to go outside, afraid to interact with other people. And I've heard other stories from teachers who are in communication with students who are expressing similar kinds of anxieties about what it means to go outside and be in public. And I think as we prepare future teachers to go into the fall and the following years, there's not going to be a quick fix. There's going to have to be a lot of work to be done. So I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about that.
One of the things that happened early on here at Elon is one of the vice presidents here, Dr. Jean Radigan-Rohr, when it was all unfolding, she started waving a yellow flag of caution that about the consequences of this time and equity issues and who was going to thrive at home and basic supports that were needed in order to even be able to present a lesson or to have the capacity to learn. So I'm curious about the long-term consequences and of this and your thoughts on what can we expect as we resume, might be some of the challenges that we're hearing about that could have lasting impact, and thoughts about how we might mitigate those or address those when folks come back. Tracy, why don't we start with you and we'll go to Drew and Scott on that.
So discussions that we're having in our daily briefings, which we have been having for 8 weeks now, are that our students, regardless of their status, whether they are in regular education classes, in exceptional children's classes, whether they're academically or intellectually gifted, or whether they're English learners, we are facing gaps when our students come back to school because the lessons that we are promoting with our emergency remote learning plan, and I say emergency deliberately because had we as a district planned for remote learning, it would have been a 2-year planning process at minimum for us to institute this type of remote learning plan. So this was certainly something that we put together hurriedly with our best intentions going forward. But certainly we recognize that we have lots and lots of challenges, especially for our students with cognitive disabilities and students who already struggled with engagement when they were in our classrooms with our best and brightest teachers teaching in front of them. So given all of these factors of students being at home and now having the compounded impact of whether or not students have devices, whether or not students have internet access, while we're providing paper pencil copies, we still have the ability of someone to help instruct the student with what they are actually looking at and working through. So we are preparing for the gaps that we're going to be facing across the board. And I think as a whole, nationally, we're going to see gaps in learning from every student.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with Tracy on a lot of her points. We all are aware of the traditional summer slide when students are out in summer school, and now you're hearing and seeing a lot about the research on COVID slide and what does that mean. And so for us, and what I would encourage all of us to think about in the K-12 sector is, how can you use this time to really study what is working and what is not in terms of meeting the needs of kids. We understand that even in Union County, not everyone currently has a device, not everyone currently has internet access, and we've worked our best to try to shore those up. I think that we are also thinking about best practices for when we do return on how we can compound some learning in the form of curriculum redesign, narrowing standards and looking at power standards for reading, math, and science. We've talked a lot about the idea of looping, where you have, the same teacher that you had this year would be the teacher that you have next year, which I believe would really do a lot at the elementary and middle level in terms of the social emotional piece as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've also heard of some ideas on, instead of having a semester schedule next year, what about the idea of a trimester where you spend the first 6 to 8 weeks really honing in on those standards, via small group instruction in a differentiated approach, where you can look at the standards that are currently maybe not being taught during the current year, and you begin with those standards the following year. So I think there's a lot of really different possibilities of how we can address the existing gaps when we do return to school. Much like Tracy said, to mitigate those gaps now, we're also offering a blended approach where we're offering instruction and remote learning through our digital platform, which is Canvas, but we're also mailing packets home for pre-K through 5th grade students. So all of our elementary students, as well as identified students at the secondary level that might have gaps in internet or device, are receiving hard print packets. And teachers are making phone calls and are really trying their best to work one-on-one or in small group with those students. Is it going to be an issue when we come back? Absolutely. I think now is the time to really capitalize on professional development and strategies that we know will be successful to help shore those gaps up when we do return.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting. Lots of creative ideas about ways we might reintroduce students back to the classroom. Interesting. Scott?
This is a bit of a tricky situation because I think COVID has revealed some gaps that existed prior already to some people. And they're seeing some differences in who had access to support systems and learning opportunities before the pandemic and who didn't. And so there's some new understanding, which can go a couple different ways. It can be positive. People can be aware that this isn't a COVID issue we're dealing with. There's actually some structural racism and classism. These are political and social issues that are really causing gaps. And how are we going to go about addressing those that we've known about for a long time? Achievement gaps, what we call achievement gaps, are nothing new, but we know they're not really issues with achievement. They're issues with funding and opportunity and the history of schooling in our country. So now that the pandemic has revealed some of these issues, how are we going to address them? That's a really big one. I'm concerned. I think there's some tension around academic gaps and then the social emotional needs that students are going to have when they return to school. And I know as a parent, I will have concerns about what my child is learning and what timeline they're on to learn what they need to learn. But I also know they're going to have social emotional needs that need to be met too. And I hope that teachers and parents aren't going to put too much pressure on children to increase their academic growth rapidly in a time when their social and emotional needs are most important. So how do we balance that as we move forward? I think is going to be tricky. And then I would say lastly, I'm very concerned about the health and well-being of teachers as we transition into the fall. Rightly so, we're going to focus in a lot on students and families and what they need. But I feel like teachers are also frontline workers. And what is it going to be like if we're adapting as best we can in the fall and students start coughing in class? I feel like that's going to be an immediate emotional response. Is this person sick? Is their family sick? Do we have the protocols in place to keep everyone safe? That's going to create some new anxieties for teachers and something they probably haven't dealt with before. And so how are we going to be supporting them as they're trying to meet the needs of so many students and families?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm thinking a lot about the reentry because we're about to commence the beginning of phase one and an end to our shelter in place, and thinking about how will people respond to that. And it's been a difficult couple of months. So as we think, and we have time for one more question, and so I'll open it up for this, but feel free to make any closing observation that you would like. I have in crisis management always honed in on the idea that in a crisis, the essential things we do rise to the top because they become we must. And I had noticed that education rose to the top in this crisis, right? We had to make accommodations. We had to determine a way to make it happen. And then our dialogue nationally, just about a lot of concern about the loss and the stress of this period of time. And so I'm wondering about essential. What's essential? What are we learning about that's essential? And one of the things that came to my mind was about the important work of teachers in our country. And I had felt like that had not been center stage for several years and had been diminishing. And one of the takeaways I had is the essentialness of education. I was hearing so much positive about our teachers and the important work they're doing and the critical work they're doing for the first time in a long time. And it gave me hope that we would see a renewal of teaching and interest and respect for the work of our teachers throughout all of this. But I'm curious about what's floated to the top for you. And then feel free to make any other observations you might like. And Drew, we'll start with you on that and then go Tracy, Scott.
So I agree with you. And what I will say is, as we're kind of closing out the National Teacher and Staff Appreciation Week, I would make the argument that every week should be Teacher and Staff Appreciation Week. I think that this pandemic has certainly taught us not to take anything for granted, and that we should do our best every single day to strive to say thank you and to be appreciative of our teachers and of our healthcare providers and of our staff that are working tirelessly. I think really what has emerged, in my opinion, there's obviously a set of academic or issues that have emerged, but to go back, I think during this time, the non-academic have been just as important. Kind of thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Tracy mentioned, feeding families. That has been a huge need, and we've got a long way to go. And when we're worried about employee fatigue, and are we going to get to the point where people start to really get worn down on that issue? Scott has touched base a lot about the social and emotional needs of not just students, but also of employees and teachers. That has emerged as a need. I think another big issue is how to teach parents how to navigate remote learning at home. That has really become an issue that we're working through a series of hopefully some parent university sessions to help them better understand how to best support their children at home. And then obviously the academic issues with device access and internet access have certainly emerged or moved to the top. But I think all of those have really said to us that above all else, face-to-face instruction, that is what our educational system has been built on. And I really think that we've got to come to the reality to say, this is the time now to really start thinking differently about how we might transform our educational system because of the uncertainty and the unknown. And so that's really where I would challenge all of us and propose that we start thinking about is how do we, as Tracy said, how do we proactively plan for a future in a time that is very uncertain, where we take these lessons learned and really apply them to move forward in the best possible way.
Great. Tracy, what about you?
Great comments there, Drew. I would say that truly what has emerged are the strength of our educators and our medical professionals and those who are on the front line. Very quickly, I think our nation and our state, our communities have learned who our essential workers are and who the folks are who really keep our communities and our state and nation running. And I hope that we don't forget that because it's so important that we value who our priority folks are. And I want to say specifically about even in the face of all that we've dealt with, the resilience of our children, our students, and our teachers, our educators as a whole, and our parents has been phenomenal. And to celebrate not only our teachers and staff, but our parents and students this week for Teacher and Appreciation Week. And actually, North Carolina is celebrating all month long as we focus on using the hashtag NC Lighthouse Leaders. Truly, all educators and our caretakers and parents need to be celebrated because this has been certainly a time that we have all demonstrated great resilience. And will be a time that we will remember forever for the resilience that has been demonstrated. I would like to say that in spite of all of the challenges too that we faced, we've seen families come together in ways like never before. We've seen parents and children come together around lessons and they have created together. They have baked and cooked and tried lessons that maybe they would not have tried before. Our middle schools are doing things like one book, one school, and parents and whole school communities are coming together and having literacy discussions on one book and how powerful that has been. So there are positives that have come from this, and I hope that we carry those forward as lessons learned as well, and that we capitalize on our mantra, together we are stronger. And as a community and as a state, we are stronger together if we will continue to focus on our resilience and our strength and continue to work together to support one another. There's no limit to what we can accomplish.
Yeah, really well said. Very good. Scott, what about you? You're going to close this out.
I agree. There's been some beautiful stories of courage and resilience and creativity that I've seen on social media. Particular teachers who are being really innovative in how they're approaching meeting the needs of all of their students, reaching out to families. I know parents have taken on new roles in heroic ways. That's so inspiring. In particular, I believe in the importance of getting kids outside. I've seen teachers integrate nature and sidewalk chalk in ways that they might not have in a typical, school day. And I'm really appreciative of some of that. So part of me is hoping that innovativeness continues, that teachers will continue to think outside of the box and engage students in ways that are real meaningful and hands-on and productive. All of that is really important. But I also think there's a flip side, which is we can't be complacent because there's a lot of other stories on social media where some kids are doing better at home than they were at school. And I've heard a lot of anecdotes like this because we have to be honest that schools are not safe places for everybody, that schools meet the needs of some kids and then not others, that a lot of marginalization and oppression occurs. So some students have found that they can learn more and perform better when they're away from school. So why is that? And I hope that teachers and administrators and community members can come together and honestly talk about why that is and what can schools be doing differently to help meet the needs of everyone and not just particular kind of student that enters the school. So I believe that at the forefront should be our anti-racist, anti-oppressive forms of education. How are we disrupting the school to prison pipeline? How can we make sure that when kids come back, we don't see spikes in referrals to the office? We don't see spikes in suspensions because kids are struggling to self-regulate and to adapt. How do we make sure there's not extra referrals for special education services, that they mistake trauma with learning disabilities? We have to make sure that we have equitable approaches as we move forward. And I'm hoping that these conversations will continue, and then we'll see some progress in these areas so that schools can be what they need to be for everyone. And I guess my last point would be the stories about teachers and schools and administrators coming together to feed families is amazing. I know that's happening here in Durham where I live. But at the same time, we have to wonder, why are schools and teachers responsible for feeding so many families? What is wrong with our system when we have so many people that don't have access to food outside of school? So again, this could prompt us to really rethink, what are our policies and programs in our communities and across our state and across the nation that cause these problems, and can we address them at the root level so that schools are not necessarily having to fill the gap in times like this?
Yeah, really good. I have to say that when I listen to the three of you talking and the complexity of what we're facing, and I have to say I'm grateful to have you three all on it because it's going to require just talent and creativity and dedication, which you all clearly have. So it has been great to talk with all of you today. Thank you for what you're doing. It's critical work, important work, and it benefits all of us, right? The whole world benefits from a well-educated person. And it really is the hope that we have for our future. So thank you for being with me today, and thanks for sharing some of the stories that you're experiencing as alumni out there working during the middle of this.